Imagine finding out the money your parents promised for your wedding, money they'd been saving your whole life, was gone. Not because of an emergency. Not because they needed it, but because they bailed out your screw-up brother's gambling debts. Before we dive into it, tell me in the comments where you're from. I love seeing the different places people tune in from. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this. Now, let's get into it. I'd been dreaming about my wedding since I was little, but not in a fairy tale way. I just wanted something simple, personal, something that felt like Ethan and me. Ethan's a construction manager, quiet, dependable, the kind of guy who fixes a sink before you even notice it's broken. For years, I'd been saving every spare dollar, and my parents always told me, when the time comes, we'll match whatever you've saved. It felt like a promise carved in stone. When Ethan and I finally booked our date and found the perfect vineyard venue, I called my parents right away. I expected squeals from my mom, questions about flowers and dresses. But her voice was tight, forced. She kept saying, "That's nice, honey," and asking if we could talk later. I brushed it off at first. Maybe she was tired. Maybe something came up. That night, as I sat on the couch flipping through wedding invitations, my phone rang again. My dad's name lit up the screen. He never called this late. I answered, already uneasy. His tone was serious, almost formal. "Lena," he said, "we need to talk about the wedding fund." My heart started racing. I remember the hum of the refrigerator, the way Ethan looked up from his laptop, sensing something was wrong. My dad hesitated, like he didn't want to say it. The silence stretched until I could barely breathe. "The money's gone," he finally said. For a second, I thought he meant misplaced, like they'd moved it to another account. But then he said Zach's name, my brother, and everything went cold. I didn't hear much after that, just fragments about debts, about helping him get back on his feet. I sat there frozen, the dream I'd spent years building collapsing in a single sentence. Ethan reached for my hand, but I couldn't even look at him. All I could think was they chose him over me. My dad's words kept spinning in my head long after he hung up. I sat on the couch staring at the dark TV screen, waiting for it to make sense, but it didn't. When I called back, my mom answered. Her tone was soft, almost cautious, like she was the one who'd been wronged. She told me they used the wedding money to pay off Zach's gambling debts. $30,000. Gone in silence. I asked her how she could do that, how they could take something they promised me since I was a kid. She said, "We didn't have a choice, Lena. Your brother got himself into a dangerous situation." Her words sounded rehearsed, like she'd already convinced herself it was right. I told her they could have called me, asked me, done anything before taking it. She sighed like I was being dramatic. "You're doing fine, sweetheart. You have a good job, a good man. Zach needed us more." That sentence hit harder than anything else. Because what she really meant was, you don't. It was like being punished for being the responsible one. I tried calling my dad again, hoping he'd see reason. He just repeated the same thing. "He's your brother. We had to help him." His voice had that final tone that told me there was no point arguing. I could hear Zach laughing in the background, like he was celebrating. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the phone. "You didn't even ask me," I said quietly. "You just decided my wedding didn't matter." My dad didn't respond. He only said, "We'll make it up to you one day." And then the line went dead. Ethan came over and pulled me close. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there, numb. It wasn't only about the money. It was about what it meant. My parents had chosen Zach's mistakes over my future, and they didn't even seem sorry. When the tears finally came, they wouldn't stop. Ethan kept saying we'd figure something out, that we could still get married without the fancy venue or the big party. But that wasn't the point. The point was that my own parents saw my brother's failure as more important than my happiness. That night, something in me changed. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was anger, quiet, sharp, and heavy. The kind that doesn't fade easily. The next morning, I tried to calm down and think clearly. Maybe there was still a way to fix things. I called my parents again and asked if we could work something out. Maybe they could rebuild the funds slowly or take a small loan. My mom said they couldn't afford more debt, and my dad told me it was time to move on. His voice was firm, like he'd already closed that chapter. "You have Ethan," he said. "You'll be fine." That sentence made my chest tighten. It sounded like my wedding didn't matter as long as I had someone to marry. I wanted to shout that it wasn't about the money. It was about what they took from me without even asking. But I could tell they didn't want to hear it. Later that week, we all ended up at my parents' house for dinner. I didn't want to go, but Ethan thought it might help smooth things over. The moment I saw Zach, leaning back in his chair with that smug grin, my blood boiled. He acted like nothing had happened, cracking jokes about bad luck and how he'd pay it back one day. He didn't look the least bit sorry. When he said, "Hey, at least you've still got the guy," I snapped. The words came out before I could stop them. "You ruined my wedding because you can't stay out of a casino." The room went silent. My dad's fork clattered against his plate. My mom gave me that sharp look that used to make me feel like a kid again. "Lena, that's cruel," she said. "He's trying his best." Zach rolled his eyes, muttering something under his breath. I pushed back my chair and stood up. "Trying his best? He's not even sorry." My voice shook, not from fear, but from fury. I left before anyone could say another word. That night, Ethan held me and told me we could build our own wedding fund, that we didn't need their help. I nodded, but deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. I could forgive a mistake. I couldn't forgive betrayal. As I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, something inside me hardened. The hurt started to turn into something colder, something that wanted balance. They thought I'd just let it go. They were wrong. For weeks, I stayed distant, keeping my thoughts and plans to myself. I couldn't face my family the way I used to, not after what they'd done. Every interaction felt heavy, filled with lies I had only just discovered. Then I heard Zach talking again, bragging to his friends about how he was going to win it all back soon. My stomach turned. This wasn't just a mistake. It was the same reckless behavior that had caused me pain, and my parents had once again enabled it. I started collecting everything I could. Every text message he sent, every screenshot of debts he owed, every notice that arrived in the mail became evidence. I couldn't leave anything to chance. Each piece I gathered built a clearer picture of the truth, one I had suspected but had to confirm for myself. It hurt to realize my parents had signed off on a credit line for him, essentially giving him free rein to ruin things again. The betrayal cut deeper than words could describe. Ethan tried to warn me. He said I should stay out of it, that I'd only hurt myself if I got involved. But I couldn't. His warnings bounced off me like water on glass. I had been patient for too long, watching others take what was rightfully mine while pretending it was okay. This wasn't just about money. It was about respect, trust, and boundaries they had completely ignored. I had to act, and I had to act smart. I spent hours planning, figuring out exactly how to reveal the truth without losing control of the situation. Every detail mattered. I imagined the confrontation, the shock in their eyes when they realized I wasn't helpless. They had underestimated me for too long. I had watched quietly, collected my evidence, and now the moment of truth was approaching. I told myself over and over, they took what was mine. Now I'm taking back what's theirs. It became my mantra, my steady heartbeat in the storm. I didn't need anger to drive me, just clarity and determination. Every small action I took was deliberate, calculated, and fueled by the knowledge that finally, the balance would shift. I wasn't just seeking justice. I was reclaiming my power, quietly but decisively. I could feel the change within me, a sense of control I hadn't had in years. This wasn't about revenge in the way people imagined. It was about reclaiming what had been taken and proving to myself that I could rise above the chaos they caused. Every step I took brought me closer to that quiet, inevitable victory. I knew I couldn't handle Zach alone, so I decided to reach out to Mara, his fiancée. I called her one evening, my hands shaking, not knowing how she would react. When I told her about his gambling, the disbelief in her voice was immediate. She couldn't understand how someone she loved could lie so easily, and I realized she had been living in her own version of his stories. Mara and I started talking more, carefully at first, each message and call filled with caution. She shared what she knew, and I shared what I had discovered. Slowly, the picture became clearer, showing just how deep Zach's deceit went. He had hidden more than either of us could have imagined, and the extent of his lies left a cold knot in my chest. We began meeting secretly, in quiet cafes and empty parks, far from anyone who could report back to him. At first, it felt awkward. Two women brought together by the same man, united by betrayal but still wary of each other. Yet the more we compared notes, the more we realized we were stronger together than apart. What started as caution grew into a careful strategy. We weren't just reacting anymore, we were planning. Then I discovered the full weight of my parents' involvement. They had mortgaged part of their home to pay off some of Zach's earlier debts, a shocking confirmation of how far they would go to protect him. It made the betrayal sting even deeper, but also fueled a new resolve inside me. I couldn't let this continue, and I wouldn't let their blind loyalty hide the truth any longer. With Mara by my side, I began thinking through a plan to expose everything. Not just the gambling, not just the debts, but the lies, the secrets, and the way my family had enabled him. I wanted the truth to be clear, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. Every step needed to be precise. There was no room for error. This wasn't about revenge in a reckless sense. It was about clarity, accountability, and reclaiming control over what had been stolen from me. I kept reminding myself to stay patient, to let the plan unfold naturally. Every conversation with Mara, every piece of evidence I collected, and every realization about my parents' choices brought me closer to the turning point I had been waiting for. For the first time, I felt a sense of power, a quiet confidence that this time, the outcome would finally be in my hands. I invited everyone to dinner under the guise of a normal family gathering. My parents, Zach, Ethan, and even Mara showed up, unsuspecting. I kept my tone light, my movements casual, pretending this was just another evening together. Inside, my mind was racing, every detail of the plan running perfectly. I had waited for this moment, and now it was finally here. The conversation started like any ordinary night, small talk and polite questions. Zach, as expected, couldn't resist bragging about his so-called business investments. He laughed, thinking he was impressive, thinking no one knew the truth. I stayed calm, smiling quietly, letting him build the illusion he wanted. Every boast he made added fuel to what I was about to reveal. Then I leaned forward and started laying out the proof. One by one, I showed the documents, bank transfers, screenshots, and loan papers. Each piece revealed not only Zach's lies, but also my parents' role in covering for him. Their faces changed, shock, disbelief, and finally humiliation settled across the room. I could feel the tension thicken like fog, heavy and suffocating. Zach's face turned red as he realized the net had closed around him. He shouted, tried to explain, to deny, but it was useless. Every excuse was drowned out by the clear evidence before him. Mara, who had been quietly observing, stood and walked away. Her silence spoke louder than words ever could, leaving Zach behind, abandoned and exposed. My parents were frozen, their usual confidence gone. My father finally yelled, trying to place blame on me. "You ruined this family." His voice shook with anger and desperation, but I didn't flinch. I met his gaze and spoke slowly, deliberately, the words sharp and controlled. "You did that when you stole my future." No one moved, no one spoke after that. The room was filled with a heavy silence, the kind that comes after a storm. For the first time, the truth sat between us, undeniable and stark. I didn't gloat, didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself, and the consequences were immediate. Zach's pride was shattered, and my parents had to face their own actions. I realized in that moment that exposure wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming what had been taken and holding people accountable. I had stayed patient, waited for the right moment, and now the truth was undeniable. The power had shifted quietly but completely, and I finally felt a calm sense of closure. Weeks passed, and the distance between me and my parents grew wider. They stopped calling, stopped checking in, leaving me in a quiet space I hadn't expected. At first, the silence was unsettling, but over time it became a relief. I realized I didn't miss them themselves. I missed the version of family I had hoped for, the support and trust that had never been real. Zach didn't get any better. Moving back home only made things worse. His debts piled up faster than ever, and the bravado he had once displayed vanished under the weight of his failures. Arguments and tension filled the air, and it became clear that no lesson had truly sunk in. Watching him struggle was bitter, but it also confirmed everything I had suspected about his character. Mara, thankfully, found her own way to protect herself. After one particularly aggressive outburst from Zach, she took legal action and filed a restraining order. Seeing her stand up for herself gave me a sense of justice, a quiet satisfaction that at least someone could create boundaries he couldn't cross. I realized that sometimes protecting yourself means putting distance between you and toxic people, no matter how close they appear. Ethan stayed by my side through all of it. His support was steady, a quiet presence I could lean on when things became overwhelming. He worried about me sometimes, noticing the edge in my words, the lingering bitterness that had taken root after all the betrayal. But he never judged me, never pushed me to forgive before I was ready. His patience reminded me that healing is a process, not a race. I spent more time reflecting on what I had lost, and what I had reclaimed. It wasn't just money or respect. It was my sense of control, the ability to decide who deserved space in my life. I realized that clinging to the idea of a perfect family only caused more pain. Letting go of the expectation allowed me to see reality more clearly, to focus on the people and connections that truly mattered. There were moments of sadness, brief flashes of longing for what could have been. But they were different now, soft memories, not urgent needs. I had carved out a space where I could breathe without fear of disappointment, where my life could grow without interference from those who had failed me. Ethan and I decided to leave the chaos behind and start fresh. We chose a small courthouse for our wedding, nothing fancy, just the two of us and a quiet moment to promise each other forever. There was no pressure, no eyes judging, just laughter and real happiness. It felt lighter than anything I had experienced before, a celebration of us, not of expectations or appearances. Even though it was simple, the joy was genuine. I could finally breathe without the weight of my family's mistakes hanging over me. Every smile from Ethan reminded me that life could be kind, that trust and love could exist without strings attached. We held hands, said our vows quietly, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of belonging that wasn't tied to disappointment. We decided to put our wedding gift money towards something bigger than a celebration, a home of our own. It wasn't perfect, it needed work, but it was ours. Walking through the fixer-upper, imagining how we would transform it together, filled me with hope. Each creaky floorboard and faded wall became part of a future we could build, a life shaped entirely by us. As the weeks went on, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. The past was still there, memories of betrayal and lies, but they no longer controlled my choices. I had a partner who cared, a home to make our own, and the freedom to define happiness on our terms. Life felt steady, intentional, and real in a way it never had before. Then the phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice trembled, urgent and desperate. She explained that their house was being repossessed. My parents, who had ignored me when I needed them, now wanted my help. Listening to her plea, I felt a mix of emotions, surprise, frustration, and a quiet resolve. I had come so far, and yet here they were, seeking aid after everything. I didn't respond immediately. I thought about the past, about every choice I had made to protect myself, about the life I had worked to create with Ethan. Their crisis was real, but so was mine. I realized that helping them now would not erase the years of hurt, and I had to decide carefully where my loyalty and energy truly belonged. I drove to my parents' house with a strange mix of curiosity and caution. This would be the last time I went there, I told myself. The moment I stepped inside, the air felt heavier than I remembered, filled with tension and a quiet desperation that made the walls seem smaller. Everything looked the same, yet empty, as if the life they had built had been hollow all along. They were waiting, anxious and pleading. My mother's voice shook as she asked if I could lend them money, hoping I would somehow fix the problems they had ignored for years. My father tried to maintain control, but even he couldn't hide the fear in his eyes. They looked at me like I was supposed to be their safety net, their solution, as if all the mistakes they had made could be erased by my willingness to step in. I walked slowly through the house, noticing how quiet it was, how small and fragile everything felt compared to the memories I carried of betrayal and disappointment. The mortgage papers, the debts, the lies, they hung over the rooms like shadows. My parents had dug themselves into a hole, and now they wanted me to climb in with them. My father's voice broke the silence. "We're still family," he said, trying to pull me back, trying to convince me that the bond was enough to forgive and forget. I looked at him and realized that what they called family had never felt like love to me. It had always been conditional, selfish, and hurtful. I spoke slowly, letting the words carry the weight of all the years of betrayal. Family doesn't take from each other and call it love. There was no anger in my voice, only clarity. I wasn't lashing out. I was setting a boundary, drawing a line that would no longer be crossed. Without looking back, I turned and walked out of the house. The door closed behind me with a finality that felt good and right. They were left with their mess, the consequences of their choices, and I was finally free to focus on the life I had built without them. For the first time, walking away didn't feel like loss. It felt like reclaiming peace. Months had passed, and I found myself driving past the neighborhood where I grew up. The familiar streets looked smaller, quieter, and somehow distant. My parents were gone from the house I remembered, reduced to a modest rental somewhere else, and Zach wasn't around either. For a moment, I expected to feel some rush of triumph, but there was nothing like that. Instead, a quiet relief settled over me, a calm I hadn't felt in years. The past didn't haunt me anymore. The lies, the debts, the betrayals, they were still memories, but they no longer held power over my life. I had built my own world with Ethan, one full of trust, care, and patience. That realization alone made the old neighborhood feel irrelevant, like a chapter that had closed completely. When I got home, Ethan surprised me with a small gift, a framed picture from our courthouse wedding. I laughed softly, the memory of that simple day warming me from the inside. "We didn't need a big wedding," he said, smiling, his eyes full of love. I looked at him, feeling the truth in his words. No grand gestures, no showy celebrations. What mattered was the life we had chosen together, away from the chaos and toxicity of the past. I smiled back, genuinely this time, and said, "No, we just needed to stop inviting the wrong people." It felt like a release, a final letting go of everything that had held me back. I didn't need revenge in the way most imagine it. I didn't need to see them suffer or fail. My victory was simpler, quieter, and far more satisfying. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't about confrontation. They're about choosing your own happiness, protecting your peace, and refusing to carry the weight of others' mistakes. Living fully, freely, and intentionally became my true triumph. As I placed the picture on the shelf, I felt a calm certainty. I had reclaimed my life, my joy, and my sense of self. There was no bitterness, only clarity and a quiet strength. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about hurting anyone. It's about creating a life they can't touch, a life that is entirely yours. Do you think the best way to deal with betrayal is to walk away and focus on yourself, or is confrontation necessary? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoy real-life stories about resilience and moving forward, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one.